Class, MASH. By a Nutty. Chapter 111, Fighting Begins. MASH was not expecting to meet the king and had no idea how to act. The guildmaster was with him, however, all of MASH's attention was on the king. The other fighters were all there, and MASH noticed that the hero was in her armor again. MASH stood before the king as he sat upon a throne on a slightly raised platform. The room was luxuriously dressed, with a chandelier for light, and banners along the walls. It was strange to find a room like this within the guild, but he remembered that the king supported the guild in the city. Guilds were supposed to be independent of the kingdom, but that was usually not the case. It was obvious that the guild here was heavily impacted by the king's presence. The king himself was bigger than MASH expected and was easily half again MASH's height. He was probably the biggest person MASH had ever seen. Something like that could only be due to a class unless he was part of another race. It wasn't impossible but extremely rare. He wore a regal set of armor. The metal was a mix of gold and silver. Normally, those metals would be useless, but the gold was used to engrave enchantments into the silver armor, and MASH guessed the man probably didn't need it anyway. According to rumors, the man was the highest level person alive, so not many things could damage him, regardless of the armor. The man looked older than MASH expected. The king was relatively new, but MASH could make out a few wrinkles around the edges of his eyes. However, his brown hair was unblemished by grey, and his jawline was pronounced. The only thing that surprised him was the man's eyes themselves. There was nothing in them, and all he could see was golden light emanating from them. MASH shivered slightly when those eyes fell upon him. "What are you doing?" The guildmaster's voice startled MASH, but it was not unexpected. He had slowly been edging closer, trying to get the king within his draconic domain. In response, he coughed awkwardly while coming up with some explanation. "Sorry, I lost myself for a moment." He tried to sound odd as if the king's presence had been what attracted him. It was the truth, though not necessarily for the right reasons. MASH relaxed a bit when the king spoke. "It is fine, I was planning on having a meeting with you at some point. My daughter speaks a lot of you and your friends. However, that will have to be a discussion for later. All of you have performed admirably, and I have arranged some rewards for you four, as well as a special prize for whoever wins the remaining fights." The king's voice carried easily, and there was a depth to it that MASH couldn't understand. MASH took a step back when he felt something enter his domain, but realized it was a chest of some kind. MASH was tempted to open it there, but everyone else was hiding their prizes. It made sense as each item was probably going to be useful for the remaining fights. The king said something else before leaving, but MASH's attention was on the box that he felt moving in his hands. Hopefully, that was a good sign. The guildmaster said something as well, but MASH only listened superficially. All she mentioned was that MASH would be fighting first, against the strong warrior that he wanted to test his dragon form on. That was all she talked about before dismissing them. None of them lingered, and they returned to their rooms quickly. As soon as MASH got inside, he cracked open the box. What he gazed at was not exactly something he was expecting. It was an odd-shaped piece of wood, with roots dangling from the entire object. MASH only had 5 minutes to figure out what the item did. Thankfully Priscilla recognized it. She sent him a message, but in a strange way where he could hear her voice along with it. "It is the heart of a tree beast. Can you give me some images?" As the images entered his mind, MASH considered the implication of the object. The king had some way of knowing what MASH's abilities were, or at least had guessed correctly. It wasn't impossible as MASH had been open in testing his new forms. The only form MASH had hidden was his dragon form, and he had revealed the cat-like form soon after fighting the monster in the arena. As MASH stared at the squirming heart, he couldn't help but smile. Priscilla's images had shown him monsters of wood. MASH knew that they were treants, he had seen those in books often enough. They looked like elaborate carvings, and he could feel Priscilla's annoyance with the memories. She had been stronger than the monsters, but they were incredibly annoying to kill. She had needed to find the heart and rip it out of the monster to do real damage. MASH eagerly ate the heart before him, taking a bite with his actual mouth before tossing the rest into a wooden creation. It wasn't very surprising, that it tasted like a piece of wood. He still swallowed the piece in his mouth easily, as the taste wasn't really all that bad. Simply tasting like wood was not really a deterrent for him. He had eaten much worse than that. MASH was tempted to test the form, but that would only drain his energy. He wasn't planning on using it for his next fight, and it wouldn't do to be lacking in energy. His dragon form would require that he kept most of his energy. At least, that was what he told himself. The reality was a bit different, as his curiosity overpowered his sense. As he transformed into the treant form, he watched as his skin turned to wood. It was the same wood that he normally made, and he could feel lightning thrumming through his body. He was glad that it took the properties of his wood, as that was several times more sturdy than normal. Even with the information that Priscilla could gather, Mash knew that his wood affinity was drastically improved. He noticed something else change, though he couldn't place it. He briefly checked his energy, curious to see how much the drain had been for the transformation. It wasn't a lot, but more than he expected. The monster the king had gotten this from must have been high-leveled. Not as strong as the dragon, but stronger even than Priscilla. At least if he followed the energy consumption of the transformation. He dismissed the form quickly. The transformation itself had taken almost 100 energy, though that process tended to be the most expensive part of the skill. He heard a small knock on the door soon after his test and knew that it was time for his fight. He left the door quickly, finding an attendant waiting for him. The man looked anxious for some reason. Mash was tempted to ask, but the man didn't look to be in the mood for it. The walk to the arena was silent, and he was led to the moving platform like he always was. As the platform rose, Mash didn't bother listening to the introductions, instead, waiting to see the man on the other side. Honestly, this had been the fight Mash had been most excited for, as the warrior was clearly the strongest among the competitors. The hero might be close, but Mash hadn't seen much of her abilities, other than attacking with the sword. Looking across the grounds, Mash finally got a good look at the man. He didn't wear much armor, only having leather strips tied tightly around his body. It was a simple armor, that wouldn't really do much of anything at this level. However, the man did have a new tattoo, along his forehead, and Mash assumed that was the item he received. The man was bald, and his eyes shone red with anger. It was not unexpected considering that he had a barbarian-type class. Begin. The announcer's words kicked off the fight, and Mash let the draconic scales grow over his body. It was time to reveal his true power. The fighter didn't hesitate, closing the distance in an instant, slamming his fist into the side of Mash's head. The man's whole body had grown a little during the motion, and his fist was easily bigger than Mash's whole head. The sound of his fist landing reverberated across the grounds. It was loud enough that it silenced the crowd from the sheer force it revealed. However, Mash hardly took any damage. He slid across the ground a little, but not enough that he couldn't strike back immediately. Mash's fist collided with the man's side, and he was sent flying much like the demon had. The man smacked against the arena walls, actually managing to crack them with the force. The fight wasn't over as the man pulled himself from the wall. The tattoo on his forehead glowed golden, and Mash could tell that it was healing him. The fighter launched himself towards Mash, but he was too slow. With his improved speed, Mash did what his brother had done before and caught the punch. Immediately, he turned the man's failed punch into a throw and chucked him at another wall. This time the noise was even louder. Still, the man managed to pull himself from the rubble. Letting out a guttural yell, the man's body grew more ferocious. He grew a bit bigger too, but it was the darkening of his skin that surprised Mash. This was not something he had revealed yet. Mash wanted to see if the man could do real damage to him and let his next strike land. This time Mash was sent skidding across the ground, however, he didn't fall. The blow had strained his muscles a bit, but his scales and bones were undamaged. Now to test if the darkened skin did anything for his durability. Mash's own punch landed squarely into the man's chest. His dash having been too fast for the man to truly follow. It sounded like his ribs broke, though the warrior only grunted in response. Mash was surprised when the man didn't get sent flying and took another blow to the head. This time the man's fist came down on it, and the floor beneath them quaked from the force. Mash shrugged off the attack, returning with another punch to the man's chest. Even with the healing, he could only take so many broken ribs. At least that was what Mash assumed, but the fight kept dragging on. Mash didn't take much damage, but his opponent seemed to be getting better at handling the blows. The fight had grown boring in the past 2 minutes of repetition. Even with their inhuman speed and strength, it was clear that Mash wasn't taking any damage. The audience seemed to share his opinion, as they had remained quiet. Mash could only last so much longer with his energy. It was almost completely drained and would only last a little longer. Deciding to end the fight with his next attack, Mash struck the man's spine. The fighter had tried moving out of the way, but he was simply too slow for Mash. The sickening crunch of the man's spine breaking was loud. Though the scream that followed it was even louder. Even still the man stayed standing, and the golden light of his tattoo began healing him. Mash sighed in resignation, knowing that he couldn't win without killing the man. He felt the temptation to end the fight and smash the man's skull. It was a sickening thought, that he was consciously aware of as it passed through his mind. He stamped it down, shivering at the very notion. Even if he was stronger, his abilities were simply not suited for a fight like this. Mash couldn't tell if it was the system's corruption, but he knew the thought bothered him. Even if he wanted to be like his brother had mentioned, he didn't want to follow the system's influence. It was impossible to tell what parts of him were true, and what came from the class system. He decided to act like what he wanted to be, not necessarily what he felt like he needed, even if it would help him in the long run. He was not as free as he would like but had enough freedom that he could start acting as he wanted. It was the simple truth of the matter. He needed to weigh every decision, rather than caring about whether it was a part of the system or not. The only thing that mattered was whether he could live with the decision. Coming to that conclusion, he spoke loudly, easily loud enough that anyone among the audience could hear. I surrender. Chapter 112, Ruining the Tournament. It was a short exclamation that left the already silent crowd even more stunned. Even the announcer seemed to freeze at the declaration. The fighter turned his head to look at him, but his movements were clearly strained. It looked like the broken spine was taking longer to heal. Plus, he was in too much pain to speak. The man was furious. A single glance was enough for Mash to know that, though it didn't stop his next actions. Mash let the transformation dissipate and just stood there in his stretched clothing. The clothes he had received for this fight had been designed to adjust with his transformations and would take a few minutes to return to normal size. So, he walked towards the moving platform, wearing clothing that was slightly too big for him. Honestly, Mash expected some boos, but the crowd was still stunned in disbelief, long after the descent had started. Logan wins. The announcer came around first, announcing the other man's victory. Mash realized he hadn't known the warrior's name until that moment. It had seemed like such an unimportant detail before, but now he considered the man to be quite incredible. Mash was well aware that his dragon form was probably already as strong as a rank above, and the man had handled himself well against it. Although, he knew at least one other person who could handle themselves better. However, using Jill's new power for comparison was unfair. Mash doubted that rank even mattered to her anymore, it was only a matter of compatibility. A person would have to restrain her magic in some way to even hope of landing a hit. His brother might be able to handle it with the freezing effect of his blade, but Mash wasn't certain about it. That fact alone made his mind spin. A level 60 class that could survive against a legendary blade wielded by someone past level 100. As he walked through the guild hallway, he saw Jack waiting for him by the entrance to the tunnel. He looked tired and a little bit angry. The most surprising thing about him was the formal wear he was wearing. A red suit, in the newest fashion trends. He noticed Mash's approach and gave him a glare before speaking. I'm going to need some kind of explanation. You really are just trying to give us headaches, aren't you? Well, get to talking and try and convince me not to smack you around a bit. He didn't sound as angry as his words would have implied. If anything, Mash thought he saw a bit of amusement on the man's face. Though his eyes still looked extremely tired, Mash felt bad for making him come down here. What has the guild been reduced to? A single tournament and we become nothing more than common thugs. Mash tried to make light of the situation, to crack some jokes, hoping it would help lighten Jack's mood. It didn't work. Jack didn't seem like he had enough energy to deal with Mash right now. As funny as that would be, I am still going to need something, even if it is only partially true. Jack sounded tired, more than could be explained by a sudden visit from royalty. Even still, he was trying to maintain his positive attitude, and Mash decided to comply with the request. Mash would have pried for information, but it wasn't within Mash's privilege to be involved, and he merely paused trying to come up with an excuse. I was running low on mana, even I don't have literally unlimited amounts of it. I didn't think I could win before his endurance ran out and decided I would rather lose on my own terms. Mash spoke confidently, as that was at least part of the truth, even if it missed the crux of it. Jack seemed to accept, nodding his head and responding. That's good enough, though if you ever want to talk about the real reason, I'm all ears. Sometimes it's easier to get something off your chest to strangers rather than someone you are close to. I need to go now, but let Jill and Luke know that they need to go through the process of informing the guild about their advancement, even if you already told your friends about the lecture I gave you." With that, Jack turned and left, moving faster than Mash could track without transformations. Once Jack left, Mash headed to where the others would be. They would be just as eager for an explanation, though Mash didn't really feel like giving them one. Mash would give them the same reasoning he gave to Jack. He trusted them enough to share, but he just wanted to ruminate on the thoughts on his own for a while. Priscilla knew, and he could feel her dissatisfaction with his decision. He didn't let it bother him though, and also understood that Priscilla could never understand him. Mash had been moments away from killing the man, and for what? A simple prize or his own insignificant pride. It was one thing to kill bandits, criminals, and murderers. Even killing someone who attacked him, or his family, was fine. However, he had almost done it because he was annoyed at not being able to win. It was a strange feeling to know it was wrong but feel nothing at the thought. The more he thought on the more emotion he could feel leaking through. It really felt unnatural to notice a lack of emotions, and somehow also notice emotions filling the nothingness. Even without Priscilla pointing out the influence, he could feel it clearly. He had given up that fight because he didn't trust himself to not do something extreme. To not try something extreme, and act like it he hadn't expected the outcome. He felt like he had been doing that a lot recently. The more he thought about his actions, the more things he came to question about himself. He gave up that fight because of indecision. Cowardice had driven him from making a decision in the moment, and he decided that he needed to take a step away. He didn't know how he felt, but taking a day or two away from fighting might be a good idea, maybe even longer wouldn't be the worst idea. Those were the thoughts that passed through his mind. As he walked towards the room with his friends in it, Mash considered what he wanted to say. At first, he thought about telling them the same thing as Jack but didn't think they would be okay with it. He didn't manage to fool Jack and would definitely be unable to lie to his friends. He opened the door, unsure of what was coming. His siblings weren't able to make it today, so he only needed to get past his friends. Unsurprisingly, they were looking at him with total confusion, and Mash just stared at them awkwardly. "Well, I think you managed to get people to hate you again. I'm assuming that was your goal with what you just pulled." Red spoke, her voice cold enough to cause Mash to shiver. It was followed by Luke, who spoke more wearily. "You probably offended the king with that. I mean, did you really have to half-ass the fight when the king was watching?" Luke's concern was more significant than Red's criticism, and Mash wondered if Jack was dealing with that. Mash wasn't that worried about getting punished, especially with his brother's presence hovering around him. The king would be aware of his new abilities and was smart enough to know where his brother was heading. "Well, are you going to tell us why?" Red continued when Luke finished, and it sounded like she was less angry now. It was probably because of something she could see on his face. Mash was accepting that he wasn't very good at hiding his emotions. Since lying wouldn't work, Mash just told him what he was thinking. "I can't really explain it right now. I'll tell you guys after the party tomorrow." That seemed to mollify them for the moment, though he caught a few of them glancing at him. It was obvious that they thought something was wrong. Still, they didn't talk about it, and instead, they discussed what the king had given him. They were impressed when he demonstrated his new form, and he enjoyed showing off a little. The next fight was between the hero and an archer, who was apparently famous. Mash didn't know the man, but Red knew who was, stating how he was the heir to a dukedom. Mash had seen one of his earlier fights, and while the man was strong, he was even more restricted by the rules of a tournament. His range was limited by the size of the arena, and he couldn't kill his opponent. The rules together were especially harsh on a sniper. The fact that he made it this far spoke volumes, but Mash didn't think he would win the round. He wasn't wrong, as the fight had been mostly one-sided, with the hero's armor being strong enough to block any of the arrows. The archer didn't let up though and increased the power of his shots as the fight went on. He was obviously trying to find the right amount of strength to harm the hero without killing her. The more impressive accomplishment was dodging every attack the hero managed. The archer had some kind of flight skill and was able to weave around the blasts of fire. It was a matter of effort that had decided the fight. The archer was getting tired of trying to figure out how much power was appropriate while dodging attacks. Eventually, his concentration slipped, and he took a single attack, but he did not have the defenses to withstand an attack from a legendary weapon. That one attack had ended the fight. This fight was more a testament of the hero's armor than her weapon. Mash still wondered why the weapon felt so weak. Maybe she didn't have a true bond, and had just gotten lucky with the weapon? Was there a way to bypass the usual restrictions of the weapon? That was a dangerous thought, and if it proved true, a more dangerous secret. Well, now there was just finals remaining. Mash talked with the others about the last fight, and what they wanted to do for the party, but it was a fairly bland discussion. They were all waiting for the next fight, but Mash could guess the outcome. The hero's armor was strong, but Mash was confident that the warrior would win. The fact that he could take a hit from Mash's dragon form, made him believe that the hero had little chance to damage. However, something unexpected happened in the finals. The fight began as normal, with the announcer starting the fight as usual. The difference started soon after when the warrior didn't rush the hero. Instead, he stood there, just letting the hero's first attack crash into him. He shrugged off the fire, like it was nothing, but still didn't take action. Mash felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise when the man clearly turned his head to face the room. He was in. Mash knew the words that would come, long before he heard them. "I surrender." Even as the hero's fires crashed into him, he spoke the words completely unfazed from the heat. Honestly, Mash thought that his glare had more heat behind it than the fires did. "Congratulations, we have our champion. I declare that the hero is the strongest fighter of their rank." The announcer matched the heat in Warrior's words, and Mash decided he wouldn't be joining any more tournaments in the future. The hero didn't look happy either but didn't say anything. The fighters slowly descended out of sight, and Mash felt a large amount of relief as he was teleported to the training grounds. Jill had done it without warning anyone, but nobody resisted the effort either. Walking out of the guild would have been a bad decision, and this was much more pleasant. Chapter 113, New Year New Me. For what was maybe the first time in his life, Mash was woken up by someone else. He had gone to bed late last night, after spending a short time celebrating with the others. It mainly involved food and showing off some skills, which Red was increasingly growing frustrated about. Still, Mash held nothing back in showing off and testing his new forms. There were two that he had been able to test, the Treant form that the king granted and the demon form that he had gained the day before. Both forms were useful, and he was surprised to find that the demon form didn't use much energy. However, it only gave minor improvements to his physical abilities. It gave him a new affinity though, and it was over the black fire that it had used, but he hated the form. It turned his skin into a sickly grey and caused his body to stink like rotten eggs. The black flames were powerful, but the form bothered him. He would use it if needed but doubted that it would ever be his first choice. The Treant form was something he would use a lot more often. It improved his durability and the durability of his wood. It made it faster to make creations and even impart more life into them. That was something he had learned with help from Priscilla, but he understood what she had meant. The form allowed his creations to supply themselves mana from the environment, so he would not need to charge the imitations with mana anymore. The clones of Priscilla that he made would be able to grow on their own and generate their own lightning. The Treant imitation, on the other hand, proved to be mostly useless. The imitation would resemble a tree and impale itself into the ground. Furthermore, it was completely immobile in that state. Even the added limbs and durability were something he could replicate with his simpler creation skill. The demon imitation was also mostly useless. The humanoid shape was slightly easier to work with, but it didn't provide the same compatibility as Priscilla's imitation of the power of the dragon imitation. Still, he was glad to have them, and the new forms had even managed to raise his stats a bit. Name, Mash Stell Lumber Class, Draconic Thunderwood Imitation. Level, 62-64. Health, 1630/1630. Energy, 2600/2600. Fortitude, 160-163. Endurance, 100. Strength, 110-115. Agility, 115-117 plus 3 120. Intelligence, 150-153 plus 7 160. Wisdom, 83. Charisma, 75-76. Free stats, 10-0. Skills, Hunt, Thunderwood Creation, Inhuman Hibernation, Monstrous Transformation, Thunderwood Imitation, Draconic Domain, Adaptable Monster Core, Monstrous Humanity, Wooden Body, Mimics Avarice. Draconic Domain, passive. Your eyes just weren't enough. Sense the changes in the mana around you. Connect to the mana in your space and inherently understand the nature of the mana. Your presence suffuses the space, weakens the magic of enemies beneath you. Current range, 16 feet 17 feet. It had surprised him to see how many stats he had gained from the forms, and he wondered if him eating the treant heart had given him the reward for the kill. The stat gain certainly implied it in his mind, as the cat thing hadn't given him nearly as big of a boost. The improvements were nice, and he was happy with the results of the tournament even if others weren't. Finally, he shook himself out of bed, addressing the visitor who had woken him. It was his sister, who had a wide smile on her face. Mash only grumbled in response but started using his meditation skill anyways. It would let him shake off the morning rust, and deal with any fatigue as well. His sister wasn't going to wait for him and started to explain what she had scheduled for the day, and how he would be going with her. "We are going out, before the big party today. I have scheduled something with a barber, as well as to meet with the clothier who made your other stuff. I had something special made for today." Mash considered arguing but didn't want to ruin his sister's fun. Plus, he had promised to be her companion for the dance and would acquiesce to her whims. So, he got up and headed to the bathroom, giving his sister a few words. "Just give me 20 minutes. She nodded and went to do whatever she needed. While he was in the bathroom, he got a good look at himself and thought that he could use a haircut. He hadn't been minding his personal care much, and his hair was growing a bit too long. It fell down his forehead but still hadn't gotten to the point where it would cover his eyes. That was when he usually cut it. His eyes hadn't changed with his recent transformations, but his hair felt different. Before it still felt vaguely grey, but, looking at it after the bath, it was clearly white. He was curious to see what someone could manage with his hair and even interested to see what his sister had planned. Leaving the bathroom, he met up with his sister in the living room. Honestly, he expected the others to join them, but it seemed like it would only be the two of them. Of course, Alex would be coming, but he had grown used to her presence hovering around Luna. She still didn't seem to like him much but wasn't trying to separate him from Luna. That was enough for him, and the two of them headed off into town. The party began later than he expected, or maybe his sister was just planning on being a little late. He was partnered with Luna for the night. Jill was going with Princess Nevis, and Luke was with Red. His brother had apparently arrived much earlier, as he was a partner to the host, Princess Amara. They had only just arrived at the grand entrance to the venue, and Mash adjusted his suit a little as he raised an elbow toward Luna. She had gotten him a proper suit, and he had to agree that it looked nice. It was pure black, except for 2 white stripes that ran from the front, across his shoulder, and onto the back. His family's emblem was repeated onto metal cuff links. His sister wore something that matched his own suit. A long high-collared dress, that was colored in a depiction of the night. Black with tiny white crystals mixed with the fabric to replicate stars. It looked like a fancier version of the robes she had worn in the church. Even Alex had dressed to impress, wearing a full set of armor. It was similarly painted black, but the only splotch of color was a white moon painted onto the breastplate. The armor was striking, and he was surprised to see her wear it, considering that he had not seen even a glimpse of it yet. The others had already arrived, and he was one of the last people. There were still a few people entering, but he was certain that they were a little late. He blamed Luna entirely, as it had taken her far too long to pick out her accessories. She settled on a single set of earrings and a simple necklace. Each was a gem cut into the shape of a crescent moon. As they were let into the building, he flinched as a servant yelled an introduction loudly. It felt strangely similar to his entrances into an arena, though he probably wouldn't be fighting anyone inside. The hall itself was large with several chandeliers providing light to the floor below. Large windows reached from the floor to the roof, and a crescent moon was completely visible outside. He didn't like how many heads turned to face him, but considering his family's situation, it was understandable. He managed to not flinch in the slightest, and Luna seemed to bask in the attention. Mash managed to hold his composure, but also forcibly dragged Luna to where he saw Arthur. She grumbled something to him, but he ignored her as he moved. The crowd was surprisingly compliant and parted to let them pass. Approaching his brother, he waved quickly. His brother wore a simpler black suit without any of the white stripes that were on his own. This style of formal wear was new to him, and he was a bit amazed to see that everyone was wearing one. Beside him, the princess wore a golden dress that shimmered under the light. The princess didn't wear any jewelry, other than a crown of silvery metal that was embedded with a dozen gems. It drew his attention because he could feel it radiating magical power but didn't bring it up. Instead, he opted to just greet them. "Hello, it has been a while, princess." Mash remembered a bit of his formality, though it didn't look like the princess appreciated it. Her face scrunched up in obvious frustration when he did so. Just Amara is fine. The princess spoke with a sigh, though she brightened up significantly as Luna hugged her. Another informal gesture, though it seemed like Amara was hoping for that. Mash decided to play along and started speaking much more informally. They talked for a little bit, and the others made their way over. Luke was also wearing a suit, though his was a shade of dark blue rather than black. Jill and Nevis wore matching dresses of gold, though Jill's only accessory was the chain-link bands of her armor, whereas Nevis wore a crown like her sister's. Red wore her blood dress rather than a tailored one like the others. He couldn't blame her as it was as nice as the other dresses. They talked a bit more once they were all together, but eventually, Luna decided that she wanted to dance. Mash was tempted to leave one of the others to it, but he would keep his promise. You know this won't go well, right? Mash made sure to stress his uncertainty as he spoke. His sister only rolled her eyes at him, before responding quickly. You literally have over 100 agility, I think you will be able to manage. It turned out that she was mostly right. He made a few small errors at the start but was quickly able to copy what he had seen of the other dancers. He didn't even have to look at others to learn the dance, as there were plenty of people within his draconic domain. Most of the people present seemed to be around his level, though few held as much power as he did. It was only now that he realized how much mana his sister really had. It wasn't as much as himself, but it was close. Closer even than some of those around them. Within a short time, he had figured out the basic motions for the dance. Although he was surprised at how loud it was. The dance was accompanied by a loud stomping, as much of the dance involved stamping their feet in time with the music. He didn't have a very good ear for it but could follow his sister's motions. They danced for a while but stopped as the day came to an end. Everyone broke up into smaller groups, uniting with friends and family for the start of the new year. Mash and Luna had done the same, joining with the others next to one of the windows. They watched the sky, waiting for the lights that would indicate the end of the year. With the windows, they were able to see it clearly, as the moon flashed gold, and for a split second, the world pulsed with a similar light. Everything was illuminated with an outline of light. Luna and Arthur were shining with more light than others. His sister lit up white like a small star. His brother shone blue, and a quick glance showed the same thing happening to everyone around him. That was it though. All the people around him shone with an outline of light, but he remained without such a blessing. He seemed to be the singular source of darkness at that moment, and he was not the only one to notice it. Many gazes fell on him, though all he did was stare at his own hands. This was the first time something like this had happened. Normally he had glowed just like everyone else. What was the difference? Was it because of his class, or was he no longer deserving of the moon's blessing? He didn't get much time to contemplate the question, as the sound of horns rung loudly from the walls. Chapter 114, Chaos Ensues. Luna had been staring at Mash. Well, everyone around him had been staring as he was the only one who didn't glow with the light of a new year. So, it was a somewhat natural motion for them all to look at Mash for an explanation of what was happening. He didn't have one though, as the situation was just as strange for him. From what Mash had been a part of recently, he expected something to happen to him, or maybe somewhere nearby. Although an attack on the capital seemed impossible. Even as Alex appeared beside Luna with her blade drawn, Mash still couldn't believe what he was hearing. Even as another horn followed the first, it still boggled his mind. The king was here, and so was a decent chunk of the kingdom's strongest fighters. Arthur moved soon after Alex, heading towards a raised dais at the end of the concert hall. It was where the music had been coming from, and his brother's voice easily reached every ear. All those at level 60 will do one of two things. Those with high mobility skills will focus on getting civilians into the pre-designated bunkers within the city. Their runes should be alighted by now, so you will have no problem identifying them. The others will clear the streets of anything that bypasses the walls. Those at my rank will be expected to approach the walls and deal with the enemy directly. Arthur didn't say anything else before vanishing. It could have just been extremely fast movement, but Mash guessed that someone else had teleported him. Mash's friends moved quickly. After a quick discussion, Jill teleported into the streets to grab people from houses. Luke went to do as Arthur had commanded, and Red went with him. Luna and the princesses were going to be escorted to the castle. Finally, Mash would take to the skies and get involved where he could. Mash stepped into a balcony, before changing to his cat form, and letting wooden armor cover his body. He launched into the air, stopping when he was high enough to see what was happening. With his speed, it only took a few seconds, but the moment dragged on as he heard the noises from below. Once at the top, Mash could see what was happening in the city. There were a few skirmishes in the streets and a few fires. He couldn't see what the monsters in the city were exactly, but they looked like more mutated creatures. They reminded him of the transformed people from the dungeon. The walls, on the other hand, were definitely being attacked by demons, and there were clearly some powerhouses among the monsters. The variety of the demons was fascinating, as he saw all kinds of magical effects that were marred by darkness. Black flames burned along the walls, and black lightning lanced across the sky. Several fights were taking place in the air as well. However, the people in the kingdom were all glowing with the light of the new year, so the contrast in the battle was truly impressive. The lack of glow Mash was emitting made him think it was due to how inhuman he had become. There were all kinds of demons, and he saw what looked like an army of the demons he had fought earlier engaging the walls. Those were likely as strong as a weak bronze ranker. "Hello, Mash, it is Prince Logain, from the tournament. I do not believe we had a proper introduction, but that can wait. How much mana do you have? I want to send you to reinforce and strengthen the walls." It sounded like the voice was right beside his ear, and Mash remembered the man was a sound mage. The plan was good, and if he had persisted, it would work too. However, he wasn't a defender anymore and would do better at countering the army directly. "I have unlimited mana. So long as I am fighting, I will be better at holding a specific section of the walls. If you saw my fight in the arena, I can easily make something several times as large given enough time." Mash made sure to get out what he figured was the most important information, though he didn't get an immediate reply. Mash was worried for a second and tried saying something else. "Where is the king, and what about people over level 200? The kingdom must have some." The prince responded after a few seconds, and Mash was glad to receive some instruction. It felt pretty awful to just look about the battle without doing anything. Mash could see large formations of ice near the front of the city, and he assumed that was where his brother was fighting. Mash wondered why he didn't spread his ice further and guessed that he had a range limit associated with his unlimited mana, even if it was large. "Sorry, I was just thinking about what you said. Head to the east entrance of town. It is the biggest density and the weakest monsters. I think that is your best scenario. As for the high-level combatants, they are fighting in another space." Mash followed the man's instructions, moving towards the east. He grew wooden wings over the ones he had gotten from the transformation and changed his form mid-flight to the treant form. He didn't stop there, letting his draconic imitation start. With the combination, he was able to grow in size quickly, and by the time he made it to the gates, he would be enormous. Big enough that just landing would be dangerous. The prince continued to speak to him during the move. "God doesn't allow people over level 150 to fight one another. They are moved to another space where they can fight. The king is similarly in a fight with someone of that caliber. Ultimately, it is their fights that will decide the battle. The rest of us just need to keep the damage to a minimum." "Wow, you really can get big, hey? Well, good luck." The prince stopped speaking to him, and Mash didn't bother responding. He saw the battle beneath him, saw demons that resembled the one from before. However, that was not the only demon he saw. They all looked sickly, but the skin tones varied across the creatures. His landing was not soft, and he was certain that it would feel like an earthquake to everyone around him. He was as big as a castle, and he landed like a falling boulder. His impact alone had killed enough demons to earn him a level. He was accosted with black flames and lightning, and even ice and other magic. Many of them caused a little pain, but none were close enough to actually reach his real body and soul. Their magic barely did anything without being able to affect his soul. The creatures were still strong physically though, and many started climbing him and tearing off chunks of wood. They were as big as bugs to him now, but there was more to his plan than brute force. Imitations of Priscilla started pouring out of his body. He couldn't switch to another imitation, but he could still make copies of Priscilla. There was also the added benefit of his new form too. The imitations of Priscilla were able to absorb mana from the ground and air, growing bigger and being able to cast lightning of their own. Plus, Mash was able to give most of the control of them to Priscilla, and mainly focused on swinging his enormous hands to crush the army before him. He grabbed handfuls of the creatures, chomping down on them with his large maw. Each handful was enough to grant him some stats, and he wondered how good his permanent gains would end up like. His hunt skill had activated a while ago, but he paid it no mind. This fight would only end when the last demon was killed. Mash was able to see hundreds of imitations of Priscilla pour out of him, every swing of his hand and tail sending more across the battlefield. They fell like rain among the demons' forces and caused havoc as they grew and swarmed the army. They were going beyond just that and would be spreading across the entire battlefield. It seemed like Priscilla was determined to give him as many benefits as possible, and many of the imitations just ate demon corpses. The fight was easy, almost comically so at this point. That was until a fireball that was half as big as he was crashed into his side, and the explosion was big enough that it managed to move his body. Although that had killed dozens of demons as well. Turning his head, Mash saw 3 figures flying towards him. Their skin was black as night, ironically matching well with the scales on his imitation. It seemed like he had finally been noticed by someone strong, and considering all the bonuses he had, these demons were probably a rank above him. Knowing how high his stats were, he wasn't scared of the 3. The opposite in fact, as killing them would hopefully mean that he could reach his next advancement. He had been gaining levels, having felt the rush of it several times already. Depending on how many demons were present, and how long the fight lasted, Mash might be able to jump ranks immediately. If Luke was stealing souls, he might already be there, though Mash didn't think he would. Hopefully, none of the level 100 creatures had gotten past the walls. Jill's P.O.V. Jill was bored since her job was a simple one. Although it was important, as she needed to grab people and teleport them into bunkers, that was not what bored her. It was the few fights she had been in. Several times she had run into monsters that resembled those from the dungeon in the orphanage, but the mutated beings were far too slow and incapable to land any hits. She hoped things would be different for the demons, but again she had avoided all of their attacks easily. Even a group of 3 demons had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience. Since most of her teleports didn't require mana, she had no concerns about that either. She had gained some hope when a demon attacked her out of invisibility. It had had pure black skin and was shrouded in some kind of cloak. Even without being able to see it, she had been able to dodge all of its attacks easily. It was like playing with an excited animal, and she had no problem dodging. The demon had tried various things, and from its speed, she guessed that it was over level 100. That didn't make the fight much harder, only made it take much longer. She had to prod that thing with her javelin hundreds of times before it finally died. She had taken out both of its eyes multiple times in the fight. It had taken a while, but she managed to beat it without getting so much as a scratch. She let out a small sigh, as she teleported into a nearby building and killed a mutated rat thing that was scratching at a door. She had seen it through one of the windows and assumed that there were people inside. The creature was weak, and she bet that even the people inside could have killed it. How could so many people not even attempt to fight? It felt awkward teleporting inside or kicking the door open. The last time she did it, the people inside had attacked her. She went with a much more conservative option and knocked on the door, speaking as gently as she could. "Hello, I am an adventurer sent to help people evacuate. How do we know you're not lying?" Jill considered the question, a little surprised to even hear it. She couldn't help but reply snidely, only regretting the decision afterward. They did not deserve to receive her sass now. Why would a monster knock on your door? However, the remark had gotten them to move. She heard movement before the door opened slightly. The man who opened it, let out a small shriek before throwing a punch at her. It was slow and weak enough that she caught it easily. She just raised an eyebrow at him, trying to figure out why he had tried to hit her. "I'm sorry, I saw the eyes and reacted." The man stumbled through his apology, and Jill remembered that her eyes were different now. Was she like Mash now, destined to strike fear in all that looked at her? The thought vanished as the door opened more fully. There were 2 kids inside and a lady who Jill assumed was their mother. The 3 of them were looking at her with more awe than fear. That was the reaction she was expecting, as her transformation had made her more beautiful if anything. The eyes that looked like the night sky were a bit strange, but not in a bad way. A quick glance around the room told her of the situation. The beds had been lifted and used to block a window in the room. She saw another that had been pressed against the door until moments ago. A basic preparation and one that would be completely useless against any real threat. She had grown strong so quickly, that seeing a scene like this made her wonder why so many people remained weak. It was not her primary concern though, and she just told them what to do. "Don't resist my magic, I am going to teleport you to a city bunker." They all nodded eagerly, the prospect of safety making them obedient. In a second, they were gone, sent to a bunker she had seen on her way. Well, that was another family saved. It was time to try and find an enemy worth fighting, but she highly doubted it. She teleported to the roof of a building she could see from the window, just in time to see an enormous wooden dragon fire a beam of lightning from its mouth. Mash was going to get ahead again, wasn't he? Well, she would try to keep up, there had to be more of those black demons. The last one had given her 2 levels, and she was eager to find more. Chapter 115, Battlefields. Mash swung his tail at the 3 demons flying towards him. Even if they were estimated to be past level 100, Mash had a lot of bonuses running through him. He didn't think that the creatures would be able to take the blow. Not that they didn't try, like the one on the far right held out its arms to catch the swinging tail. Mash was surprised when it succeeded in stopping the blow for a moment, though it was only a moment. With another push, Mash was able to slam the demon into the ground. Although the creature seemed unfazed as it rose from the crater the impact had made, without any serious problems. There was some blood and one of its arms looked broken, but Mash could see it healing already. Another enormous attack of black fire crashed into him, this time the explosion was large enough that the attack itself killed dozens of lesser demons. It had been a lance of fire that crashed into him and attempted to drill through the wood. After a moment it had exploded, burning a big chunk of Mash's wooden imitation. The size of his imitation was providing a lot of benefits now as his body was hidden deep within. If these demons wanted to get to him, it would take a lot more than some fire. To Mash's surprise, the next attack did manage to hurt him. It was unexpected because the attack had been lightning-based, although it was also black like the flames. The lightning had rained down from one of the demons, and it had spread throughout his body when it hit. He only took the damage as it coursed through the wood, but he was not expecting them to be able to damage him. It struck his soul as the surge passed through him, shocking it. It felt like he may as well have swallowed literal lightning with how much his insides felt like they were burning. Mash needed to boost his toughness and power, so he began changing to his dragon form. As he changed forms from the treant form he felt his connection to the imitations of Priscilla diminish, but actually felt that his connection to the draconic imitation strengthen. He also felt more connected with the wood now, which he thought was strange considering the change. Matching his form to his imitation must provide some additional benefit that he was unaware of. Something to be tested later, for now, he took advantage of the sudden boost of speed and power. He swung his wooden claws down on the 2 demons, ignoring the one that was still trailing slightly behind. The speed of the swing was far faster than even he expected, and the demons were similarly unprepared. It seemed like his bonuses were applying to the dragon form too, and Hunt was giving him a huge benefit with the stacking effects. The demons managed a half-formed shield of fire, but that did nothing more than singe his wooden claws. The hand slammed them into the ground, as he filled his throat with lightning. The demons that were slammed into the ground were still alive, but he opened his mouth towards the one that was charging at him. He let out a stream of lightning. It came out as a single continuous bolt that was as thick as a house. The sound of thunder was deafening as the blast hit the charging demon. It was launched by the force and dragged off into the distance, and he had no idea how far the demon had been sent. It didn't matter though, as Mash felt the rush of a level up from the attack. It seemed like for all of its physical defense it was not built to deal with lightning. What about the anti-magic from the demon he had fought earlier? He remembered how that demon had caused his magic to degrade. It seemed like not every demon possessed that ability. Now, he was doubly glad he had killed that one when he did. That was one of the 3 and he turned to face the remaining 2, as new attacks were sent his way. Mash raised his hand to intercept the blast of black fire and lightning. There was something else mixed into the magic, and his arm started decaying where the fire struck. His wooden imitation had taken significant damage at this point, and the decay was only exasperating the damage. Honestly, Mash wouldn't be surprised if the imitation collapsed, but Mash would make the most of it. Charging another blast of lightning, he used his tail as a whip to slap the demons into the ground again. The demons just fired more attacks at him, seeming to ignore the damage they had sustained and not even attempting to block his tail. It seemed like they were blinded by rage and madness, as they ignored their looming death to attempt to kill Mash in the process. The decaying effects of their attacks crawled over his imitation, and he would be lying if he said it didn't hurt. It felt like the decay was directly causing him pain. Mash trusted in his defenses though and worked through the pain. His tail pushed the monsters into the ground, but it was still not enough force to kill them. However, that was only the first part of his attack. He followed up by opening his mouth at the grounded demons, attempting to eat them. The huge wooden maw of his imitation tore up a chunk of the earth itself as he closed his mouth around the demons. Even that, was not the final part of his attack as lightning exploded within his mouth as he chewed on the demons. The demons didn't give up either, or he felt the burning sensation of the fires within his mouth. He didn't stop his lightning or the chewing though, not until he felt the rush of a level up. Only when he knew that they were dead did he stop. Looking around at the demons on the ground, he was surprised in seeing how many had died from the result of his fight with the 3 demons. Mash's draconic imitation was mostly useless now, and the decaying effect hadn't ceased spreading. Abandoning the imitation, Mash decided he would fight the remaining demons with his dragon form, and the surge of power he felt coursing through his body. He was truly embodying his class today, and the amount of power he had gained from these beings would not be insignificant. Mash leaped from his imitation, slamming into a pack of demons, and letting out a wave of lightning from his hands. Even with his smaller size, he was able to produce a lot of power. Red P.O.V. Red was close, so close to leveling that even a single demon would be enough. However, the lesser demons had been avoiding them ever since Luke killed the first with his golden fire. It seemed an antithesis to their black flames, and they were terrified of it. If only Luke would steal their souls, he would have been able to gain power like mad. He restricted himself though, his honor doing him no favors in these fights. She had tried convincing him several times, arguing that stealing souls would let him save more lives because of it, but he refused adamantly. Apparently, his conviction was going to win against reason, and she guessed that was a good thing in the long run. She focused on the road in front of her. Luke led the way, and she fired ranged attacks at enemies they encountered. However, it was clear that Luke was doing most of the work though, as she still hadn't gained that final level despite killing a few of the mutated vermin. This city was really annoying to defend too. The streets themselves were empty, but they had to walk around several pieces of debris and several corpses. Even with the fast response in the city, everyone could not be saved. There were too many buildings for things to hide in, and the paths in between buildings were too dark to notice any monsters lurking in them. Honestly, they had been jumped by a few packs of mutated creatures. Although, those moments only showcased how many stats Luke had really gained from his advancement. She was more than a little jealous of the others. While her class path was certain to be better than average, her friends had already far exceeded the notion of average. Did any nobles have classes that could compete with theirs? Years of determining a class path had been shown insignificant, in comparison to those existing around Mash. She felt like that was the most probable cause, especially with all the events that kept chasing him. Her father had mentioned that there were people like that, who always seemed to be around the center of major events. Despite leaving the family, she remembered their teachings well and knew the benefits that would come from associating with someone like Mash. She doubted that she was the only one that had noticed either. The princesses had been very determined into worming their way into his family. She caught it, a small shuffling out of the corner of her eye. It was a piece of paper that had collided with an object that she could not see. Without hesitation, she attacked the invisible obstacle, attempting to cleave it in half. Her attacks cleaved into its side but got stuck. However, the attack did break its invisibility so that she could see the black flesh of a demon's hand lunge at her chest. She held up her arms in a defense, but the demon's claws pierced through them. It was a lot stronger than the ones she had encountered thus far, and her meager defenses couldn't stop the hand as it plunged into her chest. Pain lanced through her body as it felt like time had slowed down. She could feel as the fingers tore through her forearms, cutting them like a hedge. She wanted to scream but couldn't as the creature's hand pierced through her lungs soon after. Her first thought was not for herself, but for Luke, who would have to face the invisible opponent alone. Even with all his benefits, a sneak attack would be able to kill him. She needed to do whatever she could. Accepting somewhat that she was going to die, she focused instead on attacking, drawing blood from her severed arms and chest to dig into the demon's eyes, ears, and nose. To enter through any gap, she could find and flood the creature's brain. She would at least damage the thing. She heard a thump and felt the rush of a level up soon after. Luke had probably reacted by now and finished off the creature. She could vaguely see as the arm was pulled out of her chest, taking with it chunks of her flesh from God knows where. She vaguely heard shouting, though it was indiscernible in the cloud that was covering her thoughts. Panic set in quickly as death closed in, and she tried to do anything she could. Although she couldn't focus to use her magic. Regret seeped in as her mind struggled in desperation. She knew that assassins were the most dangerous classes. That a single powerful blow was usually all it took to kill someone, regardless of what their health status would indicate. She should have been more prepared against it. No, she just shouldn't have joined. It had been a rash decision to try and keep up with her friends, and she barely caught up while dying in the process. In her last moments, she focused inwards more out of curiosity than saving herself. How far had she gotten, and where could she have gone? That question led her to spending her last living moment checking her next advancement. Darkness swamped her vision as her consciousness was whisked away. Chapter 116, Bloody Mess. Mash had no problems with the fight anymore. There were still plenty of demons, but his stats were so high, that a touch was all it took to kill one. Even without any imitation, and relying purely on his dragon form, he was killing the army just as quickly. Many of the wooden imitations of Priscilla had been destroyed, but he could tell that the battle was almost over. The demons, for all their strength, were unmatched against the powerhouses that remained behind. He was glad to include himself in that list, but he knew that he wasn't handling the brunt of the enemy. His mind kept drifting during the fight, as he remembered the prince's words. The real battles, at least the ones that mattered, weren't taking place here. Ultimately, it would come down to whether the king won his fight or not. He was just fighting to make sure that there was something left when that happened. Although that wasn't where all his worries were laid. Even if the king's fight didn't end soon, some of the other fights that had been sent to another space would be. His thoughts wandered more as the fight had become easy. His stats and defenses were high enough that these grounded demons were unable to even touch him. He really gained an appreciation of how much his skills had raised his stats in this moment. He had fought a demon of this type earlier, and while they weren't exactly the same, killing these took almost no effort. Not to mention, he had gained plenty of levels since the start of the fight, and he was curious to see how much his permanent stats had increased. With how many creatures he had eaten, he might even catch up to Luke. He saw a pack of demons getting close to the wall and fired a bolt of lightning through them. It lanced out, hitting and killing several more demons in the process. Even though those demons were fairly far away, they were still within the range of his draconic domain. His domain was massive now, and he had no trouble handling the army. Because of this, he felt an entity move towards him with incredible speed. Mash turned, raising his hand to catch the projectile. A purple fist collided with the palm of his hand, and his hand was deflected away. The other creature's strike was too, though, and Mash realized that he faced a new type of demon. Purple skin that had been riddled with scars and burns, clung tightly to a bony body. Limbs twice as long as normal, and a head that seemed unnaturally small. Mash couldn't help but be disgusted by the thing. Its body was so wrong. It had long nails that were black as night. A demon, and a high-level one. The fact that it had matched Mash's strength made him believe that it had to be at level 150. Either someone had died, or the demons were still evolving. Either situation would be a bad one. Mash jumped at the thing, throwing lightning in front of him, as he prepared to tear off a piece of the creature with his other hand. The lightning winked out of existence as it got close. Anti-magic, and it was strong enough to completely stop his magic. Mash hadn't been prepared for that and saw the demon's strike too late. Its claws crashed into his face, but his scales were strong enough to stop them. Although, a claw had managed to scratch his left eye, and pain shot from the cut eye. The partial loss of vision didn't matter with his domain, but the force from the blow sent him flying to the side. Within his draconic domain, he could feel the demon closing on him, but he couldn't recover before getting stuck again. The demon slammed him into the ground, two fists striking his still airborne body. A crater formed from the impact, but the damage wasn't very impressive. Mash rose to his feet quickly, preparing for another round. The bigger problem was that he couldn't stop the other demons like this. He hoped his friends were faring better than him. They were about to get a lot busier. Red P.O.V. Red opened her eyes, staring at three pillars that felt strangely sickly. They were all black, and she felt sick looking at them. However, she was alive and that made no sense to her. She couldn't help but look at her chest, but there was nothing there. She wasn't actually here, it merely felt like she was. Even still, she felt the need to try and clutch at a non-existent chest. Vivid images of her last moments kept flashing into her eyes, but she guessed that it wasn't really her final moments. She was somewhat scared of choosing a class. An image of her death as soon as she did, made her hesitate. Normally, she would be jumping at the opportunity, but choosing a class could kill her now. However, what was the alternative? To just remain here in nothingness. That wasn't much better than being dead. In fact, choosing a class might save her life, if she was still alive. Reluctantly, she extended her senses to the first pillar. Blood raging undead, blood fuels your fury. The blood of your allies bolsters you, while the blood of your enemies destroys. The combination of both turns you into an undying calamity, turning everything before you into rubble. Red's eyes bulged at the information. The class obviously named her as an undead, and the implication of that was not something she knew how to deal with. Her first thoughts went to her everyday life, and what it would mean to live like this. She probably wouldn't be able to age, meaning she would be stuck as she was. While not unhappy with her appearance, being stuck at 15 sounded annoying at best. Although she didn't know if that would be the case. Would her body even function like a human's? What other changes would there be? There would almost certainly be more. She refocused on the class itself, reminding herself that it was too late to change anything now. The class sounded good, and not just because it made it sound like she was unlikely to die again. That was enough on its own, but she still considered what else it would do. It sounded like her healing abilities were going to vanish, and she would instead be using her friends to siphon strength. That sounded bad, but it was not the worst thing. With Luke around, she had access to a lot of power if she went this route. However, she was concerned about where a class like this would lead. For now, she moved on to the next one. Undead Blood Wraith, your blood is more of your body than your flesh. As an entity of blood, it yields beneath your control. Even the blood coursing through others is not beyond your limits, turn it into your ally. A wraith in truth, you have stared down death, only for your screams to push it back. Trying to remember her final moments, Red didn't remember screaming. She had been in a lot of pain at the time, but she didn't realize that she had actually screamed. It was strange how vividly she could remember what had happened, but not actually what she had done. The images of the hand piercing her chest were lingering at the edge of her thought, but her own attack against the demon had been forgotten. Focus. She spoke the words to no one in particular, needing the command to stop her thoughts from wandering. If she kept thinking about that, she would only make her own life more difficult. It was something to move past. No, it was already something in her past. Thinking on the class, she considered what the other parts could mean. If her body became reliant on her blood, would she be unkillable? Probably not. Everyone knew that the system didn't provide true invincibility. There would be a limit, and it would probably be her mana. Controlling the blood of her enemies sounded good, but it was also one of those skills that were considered taboo. Although, becoming an undead was equally as problematic. While these options were powerful, the implications were too risky. Undead Blood Lord, a blood noble and a descendant of a true vampire, you have finally been put to rest. Although death could not fully claim you, you returned as something more. As an undead lord, you are one of the strongest forces of a lich. Red gasped as the information entered her mind. At first, she assumed that the class system was saving her life, but the last line made her think about Luke. The class itself would be fine except for that mention of a lich. If the class gave her any skill that made her dependent on someone else, even if that was Luke, it was not something she wanted. She had known of her family's ancestry, so she wasn't surprised by the reference. Honestly, it was more surprising that she hadn't seen it mentioned by her classes until now. This was not the class for her, and she considered the other two options. Either one would be powerful, though one seemed less problematic in the long run. Even with a chance for a taboo skill, the undead blood wraith felt like the best option. Feeling a little hesitant, she struggled to pick the class. Luke P.O.V. Luke held Red in his hands, desperately trying to heal her. He was kneeling on the ground, holding her tightly as he tried everything he could. She had been dying, and he had felt her soul withering away. In that moment, Luke felt his whole world collapsing and somehow managed to grab her soul and trap it in her body. Even now, her body felt cold in his hands, even though her wounds had long since been mended. Her arms were good as new, and he had even managed to regenerate her missing heart. It didn't seem to matter though, as she stayed unmoving in his hands. He tried strengthening her soul, tried starting her heart, but nothing was working. What was the point of being a healer if he couldn't actually heal someone when he needed to? He had been pouring magic into her continuously, uncaring about his own reserves. Finally, he noticed a change, and a flash of hope traveled through his mind. It shattered as he realized that her body was dissolving. His panic only increased, and he tried harder, only to have her literally melt in his hands. Her body dissolved into red blood, even the bones and hair decaying with her body. He ignored the sounds of items clinking to the ground, as her accessories fell from her dissolving body. What had he done? Was this because of what he did with her soul, or was it an overflow of healing magic? Could that even happen? He had failed, how would he explain this to the others? Slowly his head fell to the floor, at the puddle of blood at his knees. Luke could hear his own heartbeat thumping within his skull, and it was followed by a sinking sensation in his chest. Why did it sound like his heart was in his head, but feel like it had fallen into his gut? What did you do? Luke's head snapped up, turning from the oddly clean ground to face Red. She stood before him, looking a bit odd. His mouth went dry, as he tried to understand what was happening, all the while trying to form words. Red was standing in front of him, a dress of blood clinging to her body. Her skin was pale, and he noticed that it seemed oddly pink. Her red hair was longer, reaching all the way to the back of her knees, and it was a far more vibrant shade of red than before. The pupils of her eyes were white, while her irises were red. He felt his blood run cold as her eyes passed over him. She seemed to be looking at something inside of him. Luke didn't know what was happening, but he tried to bumble out a response to her. Chapter 117, Changed Blood. Red P.O.V. Red looked at Luke, who had become a mess. Her death had clearly bothered him a lot, and he must have used most of his mana in bringing her back from the dead. Although, it didn't seem like he knew what he had done, and truthfully, she didn't fully understand either. Her class might give her more information, and she thought about her status. Name, Elenia Venfer class, Undead Blood Wraith. Level, 60. Health, 1510/1510. Stamina, 1230/1230. Mana, 1150/1150. Fortitude, 111/151. Endurance, 103/123. Strength, 85/105. Agility, 110/120. Intelligence, 115. Wisdom, 115/130. Charisma, 63/65. Free stats, 5. Skills, Healing Blood, Blood Siphoning, Blood Manipulation, Blood Dominance, Blood Smite, Blood Execution, Bloody Dress, Perfect Bloody Clothing, Bloody Wail, Vampiric Constitution, Blood Wraith Body, Blood Purity, Poisonous Blood, Strengthened Blood, Undead Constitution, Inhumanity, Taboo Existence. Blood Siphoning, control the blood within your body. Give and take blood, damage enemies, restore yourself, or strengthen allies. Your blood improves the potency of others, granting them the gift of your unholy blood. Maximum bonus, 30%. Blood Dominance, blood is yours to command, that which you spill and that which others try and hold. Yours is a right of control, the more blood in your possession the more powerful you become. Blood Execution, command the blood that has lost the will to fight, destroy them from the inside out, using their blood as a tool for your execution. Perfect Bloody Clothing, blood is naturally a part of your life and has adapted to become whatever you need. Whether it be a regal dress, a dense armor, or even a casual shirt. Blood will always be close to you, bending to your will and becoming exactly what you need. Bloody Wail, having learned of the pain of death, you can impart that same pain to others. Let your blood scream out, resonating with the blood of others. Give them a taste of the death you have survived. Blood Wraith Body, passive blood given life, you have abandoned the need of a human body. Your body is blood, so long as you have mana you can change it as you wish. So long as your blood remains, you can restore your body with mana. Poisonous Blood, passive your undead blood is unnatural. As such it is toxic to any that taste it. Even undead could not taste your blood without consequence. Strengthened Blood, passive your blood is dense and firm. Resistant to change and impervious to the influence of others. Your blood can be sharper than a sword and harder than a shield. Undead Constitution, passive you have the body of an undead, gaining their unnatural strengths. The unique body of an undead provides you with countless benefits, but also their weaknesses. Inhumanity, passive giving up your humanity has improved your body, improving your natural defenses, and regeneration. Taboo Existence, passive stolen from death, your life goes beyond the plans of fate. To be free from fate is to have the power to resist its influence. It seemed like her class gave her plenty of skills that she didn't understand. However, the ones she did understand were still somewhat confusing. The main reason for her confusion was her new body. In the past, she could feel the blood within her body, but now her whole body felt like blood. Curiously, she tried manipulating her body, trying something like turning her hand into a blade. It felt strange as her hand dissolved into blood and became malleable to her mana. It was especially weird because her body still felt normal when she wasn't trying to become blood. Taking it a step further, she tried making her whole body dissolve into blood, and move along the ground. She was surprised when her clothes also dissolved with her, and she realized that it was probably made of blood now. Her blood seemed to be able to change colors, though there was always a hint of red to it. Her own skin was a pale white, though it was tainted by a bit of red, giving her a pinkish hue. Luke shot up in alarm, though she was still too focused on her class to respond. She also saw that she got the inhumanity skill that Mash had, though hers sounded a bit different. That hit it home that she was no longer human. She idly wondered how many of her stats had been for her class, and how many she had gained from changing her race. She wanted to test a lot more things, echoes of her family's teaching telling her how important that was. However, she had abandoned that family, and Luke definitely needed an explanation. Then she saw something in the distance and remembered that was where Mash was fighting. An enormous amount of black fire was there, and streaks of black lightning were lancing out wildly. The fires had already poured over into the city, and she knew that hundreds would be dead. She turned Luke around to see it, and they both knew that they would need to try and help. Even with all of Mash's resistances, his soul would still take damage from something like that. Mash P.O.V. The purple demon was a problem. Mash understood that demons were naturally stronger and faster, but he still didn't expect one to be able to keep up with him now. Honestly, his stats felt like they were over triple what he had before, and he only seemed to be a match for the demon. Not to mention that its anti-magic aura was nullifying his lightning in its entirety. Mash watched as the creature raised its left hand. Within his domain, he felt what was happening and dodged to the side. A large invisible hand slammed into the ground where he had been standing. Stone was sent flying about, and an odd-shaped crater appeared. The demon's distinct long fingers and nails imprinted themselves into the ground. That wasn't all it did, as it jumped towards him when he moved to dodge. The creature intercepted Mash, striking with a clawed hand. Rather than trying for defense, Mash retaliated with his own fist. One thing he had noticed was that his scales were still enough to protect him. They hadn't broken from the creature's previous attacks, and he was confident that his bones were more likely to break before his scales. Mash's fist dug into the creature's ribs, and he could see 3 ribs break as the demon's skin had clung to its bones. Although the creature wasn't trying to hit Mash, instead it let out an angry growl as its hand wrapped around Mash's head. Shutting his eyes, Mash could still see through his draconic domain. He was able to see as black lightning flowed through the demon's arm and slammed directly into Mash's head. The lightning lanced through his body and sparked about, striking everything that was nearby. Even other demons died from the enormous amount of lightning. This time his resistances did little to obfuscate the damage to his soul, and pain surged through his body. Managing to stay conscious, he saw an outline made by Priscilla. Immediately he followed, vaguely hearing her voice through the pain. With the anti-magic of the demon, his wood grew slowly, but it managed to disturb the creature's footing. The rocks beneath the creature's left foot broke easily, and the creature slipped. It was not enough to get it to let go, but it did stop the lightning long enough for Mash to retaliate. Mash kicked off the creature, using his own claws to dig into the creature's arm while he did so. At first, the demon's arm didn't give, but his claws managed to dig enough bone that he was able to tear the demon's hand off. As Mash leapt away, he didn't hesitate to throw the arm into a wooden mouth he formed on his back. There was a noticeable increase in his stats from the piece of the demon, and it brought him a little joy to see the demon look at where its hand used to be. It seemed more surprised than damaged, though Mash took advantage of the opportunity to begin forming another imitation. He wouldn't have the time to make a very large one but could make something small. There was no reason to hold back, and he went with the dragon imitation. The wooden body growing over his real one seemed to shake the demon out of its stupor. It charged at Mash, but by the time it reached him he matched it in size. Mash raised his arm to block the clawed strike of the demon, but the wood wasn't as durable as the scales and the demon's hand easily dug into the wooden limb. Mash felt as it mimicked his earlier attack, and it tore off the wooden hand of his dragon form. Thankfully, his real hand was further in, and Mash struck back with his wooden tail. He tried to stab the creature, using his tail like a spear. The tail managed to get through the demon's skin but couldn't pierce through its whole body. It got stuck, and even with one hand, the demon had no trouble tearing off the limb. Mash was losing, and he knew that. Despite the damage he had managed, it was clear that the demon was treating the fight lightly. A missing limb was not such a big deal for high-level fighters, as a single healer could usually fix that. Even as a demon, they could probably manage the same thing. He needed more power, and while eating this demon would be for the best, there was a ton of other stats around him. As the demon struck again, Mash intentionally jumped with the blow. He kept growing the wooden imitation, repairing the damage as he opened his wings and glided towards the demon army. Crashing into the army, he opened his wooden maw and bit a chunk out of a demon. He forgot that his imitations gave him vague sensations, and he got a muted version of the flavor. The demon meat was still nasty, but it was something he could manage now. The stats were worth it and he kept attacking the demons while growing. Obviously, the purple demon wouldn't just let him continue. An invisible force appeared within his domain, and he couldn't avoid it. Mash felt like one of his wings was ripped apart, and he crashed into the ground. It was rough, and his wooden body strained under the force of the demon. Mash managed to struggle to his feet and saw the purple demon tear of the hand of one of the weaker demons. Forming lightning in his hand, Mash aimed for the demon. It dissolved from the anti-magic, and Mash couldn't do anything to stop the demon as it attached the hand to his body. The limbs joined together, healing instantly. Nonchalantly, the demon raised one of its hands upwards, black flames gathering above it. It kept growing, till it eclipsed even the castle. Mash had been growing his imitation the whole time, but he knew that the flames would encompass him completely. It would kill countless demons as well. Mash started using his creation skill as well, forming a wall in front of him, while he braced himself for the impact. His wings had regrown by this point, and he moved them to act as a shield. He wanted to put as many barriers as possible between him and the black flame. He only had a few seconds but managed what he could. The black flames flew toward him. It was fast, too fast to dodge. Trying to block seemed to be the right call, but the flames quickly covered his body, and even most of the battlefield. His wood held out for a moment, but eventually, he was left with only his dragon form. Mash tried resisting, and Priscilla tried to get him to start some magic. "Do what I'm telling you." Priscilla's pained yell got Mash to try what she suggested, and in an instant, the pain vanished. The black flames were going around him, the spell manipulating the flames directly. He was confused for a second but realized that Priscilla had figured out its magic. He had gained the demon's affinities, and with all he had eaten, he probably gained more. This was a mix of the demon's anti-magic and its black fire affinity. Priscilla was using a combination of the two to make a barrier for him. Despite the searing pain he felt from the demon's attacks on his soul, he found himself laughing a little. To have gained an anti-magic affinity and probably many more, made fighting all these high-level demons worthwhile. Chapter 118, High-Level Monsters. Mash was in the middle of a raging storm of black fire and lightning, Priscilla's hastily constructed barrier and the dragon scales of his form being the only thing protecting him. Without those, his soul would have long been destroyed. However, he could resist this attack, the real problem was figuring out how to follow up. The demon was definitely one of those that had been fighting someone at level 150, and despite Mash's above-average class, he couldn't handle the demon. The problem was no one could. If another fight had ended and a human had won, they would either already be on their way or had something else to deal with. His best bet would be to attack after the fire dissipated, to at least try and rip the demon's head off. Assassination tactics worked against most enemies regardless of levels or stats. Mash only had two ways of winning a fight like this. His abnormally high physical stats letting him catch the enemy off guard or enduring long enough for the enemy to run out of mana. He rarely got into a fight of attrition but was confident in winning those. His scales were still undamaged and figured that he could outlast his opponent. He would still try to kill the demon now though, as it might have exhausted itself with this attack. At the edges of his draconic domain, he felt the vortex of black fire slowly diminishing. It was being drawn to the center, and Mash guessed that the attack was ending. He prepared his sneak attack, and as the fires slowly drew together, Mash leaped towards the demon. Only after he had jumped forward, did he realize the demon's magic hadn't ended. He assumed it had been vanishing, instead, his movement had been stopped by pure force. In an instant, he vaguely felt something collide with him. Mash slammed his mouth closed and his eyes shut, bracing for the impact. Then he heard the sound of something breaking and distantly felt like his body was sent flying somewhere. Nothing made sense, and he tried to figure out what was happening. He felt another impact, this one caused pain to flood his body. Slowly his vision returned to him, the bleariness passing and letting him see what had happened. He felt something against his back and imagined it was the wall. He shook his head violently, clearing his mind so he could properly understand what had happened. His back was against a wall, but it was the wall of a building. A quick glance showed him a large section of the city wall was missing, and even a portion of the city was just gone. Even further away from the walls, the buildings were turned to rubble. The attack had destroyed almost a quarter of the city. Mash's concern went to his sister, and he tried rising to his feet. He barely managed to move his arms, the broken bones retaliating violently. His eyebrows rose as he looked at his body and saw that sections of his scales were broken, blood pouring out of the cracks and breaks. Needing to move, Mash tried to stand again. Only for the pain in his arms and legs to keep him seated. However, he needed to do something. No one else could survive an attack like that. Even with all of Jill's power, she wouldn't be able to stand near the flames. He worried about his friends but couldn't keep sitting idly. Tree beast! Turn into the tree beast! Priscilla was screaming at him, but he had been ignoring her. His focus was entirely on the devastation before him, and he only just managed to listen to her. He didn't hesitate, dropping the dragon form, and turning into the treant form. Slowly the pain diminished as his body changed, and he was pleasantly surprised to realize that he could fix some of the damage. His broken limbs and muscles healed easily, though the lingering damage in his soul remained. He could restore his wooden body, with his magic. That should have been obvious to him. Quickly he tried turning back into his dragon form, only to feel pain shooting through his body as he attempted to do so. He stopped changing and remained in the treant form. It seemed like whatever fixes he had managed in his treant form, would fall apart when changing from it. It was more like he was holding his body together with his magic, and it would fall apart as soon as it returned to flesh and bone. This was the consequence of not having a true healing skill. From his understanding of this form, there would be a single point of vulnerability on his body, and so long as he kept the enemy's attacks away from that he would be able to live. Thinking about the strength of the form, he decided to take advantage of the improved affinity with his creation magic. Priscilla, any ideas? Images flashed through his mind at the request, showing him different forms of tree beasts she had seen. While they weren't bad, he didn't want to try and adapt to a new body shape. Instead, he just went with a humanoid visage and enlarged it significantly. The demon took notice, but he had had enough time to make it as tall as a building. His speed improved a lot with the form. Not to mention, he could feel the wood absorbing mana from its surroundings. Mash continued to grow as he rushed toward the demon. Give me some imitations. Priscilla had calmed down significantly, and Mash started letting imitations pour out of him as he ran. From the edges of his domain, he could see the imitations scurrying through the city, though he paid them little mind. She wouldn't do anything he didn't want her to, and he would need to trust her. As the demon got close to him, Mash tried kicking it like a kid would with a ball. That was only a part of what he did, as some of the imitations of Priscilla threw small bolts of lightning at the thing and roots rose from the ground grabbing hold of the demon's feet. The demon bowled over them, the lightning dissipating against the thing's anti-magic. However, Priscilla had expected that and instead aimed her lightning to blind the creature. It seemed to have worked, as his foot crashed into the creature sending it flying back towards the broken wall. Mash ran at the demon, even as he sent it flying. Mash didn't think he could beat the demon anymore, but he needed to make sure that any more attacks like that large one would be directed towards the other demons, rather than the city. He believed he could manage that much. Even though Mash's lightning magic wasn't as good as Priscilla's, he could manage something. Rather than focus the lightning on any type of attack, he merely had it constantly surging from his body. Hopefully, it would add some power when he struck. As the demon regained its footing, Mash was almost twice as big as before. He threw his fist at the creature, the demon holding up a hand in defense. The wooden fist of his armor collided with an invisible force. He could vaguely make out the shape of an enlarged palm with his domain. The wood broke under the force of the collision, but Mash quickly repaired it as he attempted to strike with his other hand. Although, Mash didn't think that would be enough, and followed the punch, with another. Even as his punches failed, he managed to turn himself towards the broken wall, and away from the city. Exerting a significant amount of effort, Mash continued to grow as he kept punching against the invisible hands. Mash then grew spears from his hand, having them snake around the invisible barrier. He could feel its shape clearly with his domain, and the demon hadn't been prepared for the attack. The blades interrupted its concentration, as they managed to cut the demon. This let Mash grab the creature. Without any hesitation, Mash threw the demon past the broken wall, continuing to run towards it. Having grown significantly during the last exchange, he needed to straighten his body as he ran. He was as tall as the walls themselves now. Mash saw the black flames generating above the demon's head. It was the same attack, and, in a panic, Mash jumped to the right. With where he was standing now, the attack would do more damage to the demons than the city. Even still, Mash didn't want to let the thing do as it wanted. He jumped the demon, planning on interrupting the spell. The demon dodged Mash's lunge but didn't throw the orb at him. Instead, it tossed the thing towards the city. Reaching desperately, Mash grew his arms out to become abnormally long, as he reached for the fire. His wooden hand collided with it, and he prepared to take the brunt of the explosion. He kept growing his body, moving to envelop the expanding flame. The fires burned his soul as the orb grew bigger and bigger. He dug his wood into the ground and grew his body out. Even if he couldn't stop the explosion, he could try and restrain it. When the explosion came, Mash was able to better understand what was happening. The black flames condensed to a single point, all the mana and power reaching a maximum before exploding violently. The heat and force turned his wood to ashes and broke everything. Mash didn't get the opportunity to shut his eyes fully and everything went black for a moment, but his vision returned quickly. As he looked around, he saw that his wooden creation had all but been destroyed. Large chunks of it had turned to ashes, and several pieces scattered about. His own body wasn't much better, though his treant form had managed to keep him alive. He was healing, though a quick look told him that he would need to regrow almost half of his body. One of his arms and the lower half of his body was completely missing, but he didn't feel any pain. This form seemed to remove that, and he was able to focus on restoring himself. He could fix his body, but again it was just a temporary fix, like holding his body together. Mash felt something moving within his draconic domain and looked up to see the demon staring down at him. Its eyes were entirely black, and its purple skin seemed paler now. The demon didn't attack, it just stood there, looking at him oddly. The demon opened its mouth, but Mash couldn't understand what it was saying. Its voice came out as a series of incoherent noises. It sounded like dozens of people were screaming all at once. He checked with Priscilla, but she didn't seem to know either. Even still, Mash tried to speak to the creature. Anything to stall for time, the longer the demon was here the better. What do you want? The demon tried again, though this time all Mash could hear was the screeching again. It sounded odd, noticeably different from before, but it was still not something he could understand. The demon looked like it was about to continue, but then its head snapped towards the castle. Mash's own eyes followed the movement, and he was glad that his body had regrown completely by now. Considering his next attack, Mash watched as the light seemed to cascade over the area. That didn't make sense. Even though Mash had been fighting for a while, the sunrise should still be hours away. Turning his head, Mash saw a figure who was shining golden in the distance. Mash felt something shift in his domain, and the demon's own head snapped towards Mash. It quickly struck out with a fist, but Mash was already gone. Even without looking, Mash knew that only Jill would be able to react that quickly. Run, get me to Luna or Luke. I need to heal before I can fight the demon again. Mash spoke quickly, his voice sounding odd in the form. It sounded more like echoing whines than a proper voice. He hadn't noticed it with the demon standing so close to him. Jill teleported them into the city, and Mash saw her eyes glow a strange mix of colors as she looked around frantically. He wanted to ask what she was doing but instead chose to start healing himself, while he could. Even if his meditation wouldn't be that effective while in this form, he hoped that it would do something. That only lasted for a moment, as he felt the temperature rise drastically. It was followed up by the wails and screeches of creatures. They seemed to be coming from everywhere, and it was quickly followed by a person's voice. Your king has returned victorious. Recover, as he eliminates the remaining monsters. It was the prince again, his voice seeming to cover the entire kingdom. Mash's first thought upon hearing this wasn't relief though. If the fight was over, his skill would stop working. The rush of power that came with a level up suffused his body. As if on cue, his treant form started dwindling, and he could feel the pull of unconsciousness. Mash was horrified as his body experienced the pain of all of his broken bones and muscles, while also taking the backlash from his hunt skill. He didn't have the strength to stay focused, and the pain quickly overwhelmed him. The last thing he remembered seeing, was Jill turning to see him, as blood started pouring from cuts in his hastily stuck together skin. Chapter 119, Correlation vs Causation. Mash didn't really know how much time had passed, but he woke up to see a very stressed-looking Luna. It took a second for Mash to process what had happened, and he sprung to his feet in alarm. He almost ran back out, but seeing everyone else in the room, he figured the fighting was over. If there was still going to be fighting, he doubted that Arthur would be here. Forcing himself to sit back down, he took in his surroundings properly. The walls were adorned with elaborate paintings, and the bed he had been lying in was obviously of high quality. Despite the luxuries, it was the density of enchantments that told him that this was the castle. With his domain, he could trace the enchantments along the floor, and there was even some on the furniture too. As Mash started remembering everything, his eyes naturally went to the balcony. "You should rest, you can deal with the rest later." The concern in Luna's voice was the only thing that stopped him from getting up and checking the results of the battle. Honestly, he didn't feel the need to rest, her healing having washed away the fatigue too, but he only nodded his head. Instead, Mash turned to the others, wanting to hear about what they experienced. His eyes stopped on Red, raising an eyebrow at her new appearance. Her hair was a deeper shade of red, and her skin was oddly pinkish. It was significantly paler too, and the pink tint made it seem like her whole body was blushing a little. Even her clothes were oddly tinted red too, though her shirt was obviously green and her pants blue. Why did he see red at the edges? His mouth fell open when he watched her body vanish. With his domain, he could tell that she didn't really vanish. Her body dissolved into a puddle on the ground, before scurrying closer and reforming. How did a human body work like that? He was going to press her for some answers, but she mouthed the word later, and he let the subject drop. They were in the castle and would certainly have people listening in on whatever they said. Sadly, the conversation had to be pushed back, and they talked about much more mundane topics instead. Mash talked with his family about their plans for the future, and what the other three wanted to do about their contracts. The idle conversation lasted for almost an hour before they lost things to talk about. Too many thoughts and worries invading their attempt to make peace. Not long after, they separated, deciding it would be best for everyone to get some rest. Mash took this opportunity to check the consequences of the fight. He debated whether to do it or not, but he couldn't relax without knowing. Mash had considered distracting himself by checking his status but wanted to know the cost before seeing his reward. There was no number of levels that would be worth that single attack of the demon, but he wanted to see what it truly entailed. Only after, would he feel comfortable checking his status? Finding a strong resolve behind that thought shocked him, but it managed to get him to his feet. He was facing away from the door that the others had left from. The wall on this side was covered in drapes, and he knew that there would either be a window or a balcony behind them. From the height of the windows, he guessed it would be a balcony. As soon as he stood up, he hesitated briefly. Taking a small step forward, he sent Priscilla a thought that had been bothering him since the start of the battle. "I caused this, didn't I?" Priscilla didn't reply with any sarcasm or words, merely giving him the feeling of a small nod. She knew as well as he did, that it was likely his fate that pulled the city into this. He was smart enough to know that that didn't make any sense, but he wasn't exactly thinking about it rationally. Even if he wasn't directly to blame, there were too many coincidences surrounding him that he couldn't help but connect the dots. First, the other's dungeon run had been interrupted by a demon, which by all accounts shouldn't have been there. Then Mash and Jill run into a group of people that were clearly working with the monsters. Finally, the battle started soon after Mash had been excluded from the New Year's blessing. If it was just one thing, Mash might have been able to tell himself that he wasn't the cause. However, he had known after seeing the crows that something big was coming. The fact that he had seen them personally and chose to remain, only proved that to him. Despite that, he always believed that he could handle it. Whilst that might be true, he didn't consider what it meant for other people to have to deal with it. Opening the curtains, he saw the results of that foolish way of thinking. Even before stepping onto the balcony, Mash got a good look at some of the destruction that had happened. The attack from that demon had destroyed around a third of the city. Many of the buildings seemed to have been totally destroyed, and many others were turned into rubble. It was as if something had hit the town, and simply taken a chunk of the city away. The walls, streets, and buildings were simply gone around where the explosion had happened. The effects of it rippled out for a great distance too. He pushed through the balcony doors, moving to step outside. The sun was out now, but Mash couldn't help but feel like it wasn't appropriate. It felt more appropriate for it to be cloudy or raining. Instead, it was one of the clearest skies he had seen in the past couple of weeks. Despite the bright weather, the city was shrouded in a veil of despair. The normally loud streets were filled with silence. His eyes kept moving back to the decimation from that one attack. That had been his fight, his responsibility, and he had failed. It was more than that though, as the fight proved that he couldn't contain the events that surrounded him. Even if he survived, he couldn't protect others from it. The enemy had simply been too strong, and even with all the advantages of the class, he was only able to slightly delay the creature. How long had he lasted? He didn't know, but felt like it couldn't have been more than 10 minutes. The demon was considered to be level 150 by the class system. For a long time, Mash had thought that there must be some reason that high-level people never fought one another, and it turned out he was partially right. When people at that level fought, they were taken to another place, presumably to avoid destroying the world in the process. That power might not be within the realms of people at that level, but the demon could have destroyed the whole city with that one attack. Crack! Mash's eyes fell to the short wall of the balcony. His grip had been tightening as he observed the consequences of the battle, and the stone crunched beneath his strength. The thought to stop didn't even cross his mind, and he only closed his hands into fists, breaking the stone in the process. It didn't provide him any satisfaction. Instead, the action had managed to make him feel worse. There had been enough destruction, and here he was causing more. I would appreciate it if you could avoid damaging my home. The voice sounded like it knew a secret, and Mash's head slowly turned to the speaker. They were hovering right outside of Mash's draconic domain, and golden light seemed to radiate off them. Even without the light, Mash could recognize the king when he saw him. Despite knowing he should show some propriety, he couldn't bring himself to do it. Instead, he let his gaze fall back to the city below him. Mash felt as the king moved closer, his power seemed endless. In fact, Mash couldn't see the limits of his mana and guessed that it was basically infinite. The king slowly descended on the balcony next to him, looking over the city too. At that moment, the king looked very old. Without his armor, the man didn't look nearly as muscular, and the more mundane clothing he chose to wear made him look like a tired father. After a few seconds passed, the king continued speaking. I had a vague understanding of your situation. I had believed that the fate following someone of your level would be manageable, but this fight has proved me the fool. I don't blame you. This incident was my fault, for believing that your fate would not be able to affect me. However, I will not be making that mistake twice. The king sounded disappointed as he spoke, and Mash heard a tinge of sadness in his voice. It hadn't occurred to him that someone else could know about his fate, but there would certainly be classes that could tell. Mash didn't look towards the king. His heart rate increasing, as he processed the king's words. Mash was going to die, and there was nothing he could do. The king didn't stop speaking though. You will have to leave the city, ideally by tomorrow. However, I understand that you and your friends might need some rest, so I will give you up to 3 days. I'm truly sorry, especially after all you did to defend the city. Mash felt some of his worries die down. Before the battle, Mash had considered slowing down, about taking a small break. That was impossible though, and he needed to accept that. He probably wouldn't be able to relax until he was strong enough to guarantee the safety of those around him. Nodding to the king, he spoke with resolve. I will leave tomorrow. The king nodded, seeming satisfied with his response. The king turned to leave, saying one last thing as he stepped out of the balcony. I recommend that you avoid staying in cities for longer than a few days. Also, don't turn into a demon while you're here. With that, the king was gone, and Mash was alone once again. He stared into the distance, unsure of what to do. Leaving was a given, but the king's last comment made him unsure of where he should go. He would do some research on the nearby dungeons tomorrow. He couldn't, in good conscience, travel to other cities. However, a life spent traveling dungeon to dungeon didn't sound particularly good either. This was another thing he needed to talk with the others about as well. They had been just as affected by his fate. Mash remembered how everyone had looked earlier. Red's eyes kept glancing downwards and Luke kept looking at her too. His face seemed like it was conflicted, constantly switching between concern and something Mash couldn't identify. Even Jill had been looking at them strangely, though she didn't seem to be in a particularly bad mood. There was no point in delaying more, and he also wanted to see if he could help with the reconstruction. While his imitations would dissolve, his normal wooden creations lingered, and if he made them while in the treant form, they would last indefinitely. It was one of the bonuses of creations that absorbed their own mana. He could do a lot for the reconstruction and would do as much as he could before leaving tomorrow. He lingered for a few more minutes taking in the sight of the city. Slowly, he turned away and entered the room. He felt a sudden rush of power, and he wondered what had caused it. A quick check told him that Priscilla had formed another body. That was a lucky break, as Mash planned on leaving one of her real bodies with his family. That way they would be able to manage some form of communication despite the distance. Plus, it would hopefully reassure them of his safety. Finally, he took the time to check what he had gained from the battle. Chapter 120, The Path Forward. Mash decided it was a good time to check his status and see what he had gained. Unlike the others, he would have some permanent benefits from eating the demons, not to mention all the levels from decimating an army. Despite the sad scene behind him, it couldn't completely shut out his eagerness. Name: Mash Stell Lumber Class, Draconic Thunderwood Imitation. Level: 6478. Health: 1800/1800. Energy: 3110/3110. Fortitude: 163/174 plus 6 180. Endurance: 111. Strength: 115/121 plus 9 130. Agility: 120/127 plus 23 150. Intelligence: 160/163 plus 37 200. Wisdom: 83/90. Charisma: 76. Free stats: 0/75/0. Skills: Hunt, Thunderwood Creation, Inhuman Hibernation, Monstrous Transformation, Thunderwood Imitation, Draconic Domain, Adaptable Monster Core, Monstrous Humanity, Wooden Body, Mimics Avarice. Draconic Domain: passive. Your eyes just weren't enough. Sense the changes in the mana around you. Connect to the mana in your space and inherently understand the nature of the mana. Your presence suffuses the space, weakens the magic of enemies beneath you. Current range: 17 feet 21 feet. Mash was right about one thing: he had gained a lot from the fight. His intelligence and wisdom didn't change that much despite the numbers of demons that he ate, and he guessed that was mostly since most of the creatures didn't seem to be focused on those stats. Only the black and purple ones felt particularly intelligent. It was clear that most of the gains from his skill went to his physical attributes. He wondered if at some point they stopped giving him any improvements, as there would certainly be diminishing returns as his level increased. 14 levels were significant, but it felt a little low considering what he did. He had killed hundreds of demons, most of which he guessed were around level 60. Not to mention the black and purple ones that were way stronger. Though, he didn't kill the purple one but expected to gain something from it. Well, he had gained some things from the creature. The anti-magic affinity that Priscilla had been able to take advantage of would become a huge strength. At the very least, he knew what he was going to practice next. While the black flames and lightning were useful, he didn't think either was better than his lightning. He also needed to see what the forms would give him, but he would heed the king's advice and test it later, away from the eye of the public. He used his free points as soon as he saw how many he had. He still believed that there were other thresholds that needed to be passed and took the opportunity to raise his intelligence to 200. Also, he realized he needed to take better advantage of his dragon form. It was the only way he could compete with higher-level opponents. It boosted his physical abilities, and he assumed it would be proportional to his base attributes. He decided that he should invest in his physical attributes, and after losing to the demon, he knew he needed to improve his speed and strength. His speed was the more important of the two, as he needed to be able to keep up with things to hit them. The high-level demon showed him where he was lacking. He didn't expect to magically become its equal, he just needed to do what he could. Also, he needed to deal with the additional body of Priscilla. If he left it as it was, he would come to rely on the boost it gave, but he was planning on leaving it with his family. Summoning one of Priscilla's true bodies, he made her hang around his neck like an accessory for now. He had noticed when it had been completed, the improvements to his mental capacities were noticeable. He didn't want to get used to it since he planned on leaving it here. Even if he was leaving, he wanted some way to keep in contact, and giving one of Priscilla's bodies to Arthur or Luna would work. That's where he wanted to go now. They were both still in the castle, and it shouldn't be too hard to find them. As he left the room, he was a bit surprised to see a knight posted outside of his door. Mash couldn't make out any details, as the man was wearing a full set of armor. It looked like he was guarding the door, and he seemed a little surprised to see him moving. Since the man was just standing there, Mash took the opportunity to question him. Do you know where my siblings are? The knight turned to him at his words before nodding firmly. After which, he started heading down the hall, and Mash followed behind him. Was he not able to speak? It was rare for people to have impairments like that, but it wasn't impossible. Mash didn't really know how to act around someone like that, nor did he want to press for answers as that sounded like the wrong thing to do. Silently, the knight led Mash to a much larger room. The halls were long, and the doors varied in size and form. The room he was taken to was behind a set of double doors, and Mash guessed it was a communal room of some kind. As he opened the wooden doors, Mash was greeted by a dining room. It was larger than the one in his brother's place, and the table could easily seat 20 or 30 people. However, only 5 seats were taken currently. Alex wasn't there, though he guessed that Luna didn't need a watcher when in the castle. Mash took a seat beside his sister and proceeded to tell the others of what the king had said. That's not fair. You can't be blamed for it. His sister's indignation made Mash feel a bit better, but he still blamed himself. It wasn't out of logic, but he couldn't avoid thinking that way. Even if his presence only slightly sped up the event, he would still believe that he was to blame. I don't know how the king knows, but he is right to take the precaution. Even if it is unfair, I can understand the decision. Mash tried to appease his sister since she looked like she would go and try to yell at the man. While Mash doubted that the king could actually punish Luna, he didn't think he wanted her to do something like that. Plus, Mash was telling the truth, knowing that he would make the same decision in the man's position. Mash slowly turned his head to the others, though he didn't get to say anything before Jill spoke. Before you say something stupid, I'm just going to tell you that I'm sticking around. After the fight yesterday, I think I can confidently say that I'm pretty invincible. And, for what it's worth, I think Red is too, at least kind of. She sounded absolutely certain, so Mash didn't try to protest. She had been able to avoid the purple demon, even though she had less stats than it. Not to mention, that she had gained her fair share of levels. How many demons had she killed for her to have gained so many? Mash turned his attention to Red as Jill finished speaking. Fine, I'll tell you. If the king knows so much about you, then there isn't really a point trying to hide information here. He probably has a way to find out whatever he wants. I'm an undead now and will survive so long as some of my blood remains. She sounded almost casual as she spoke, but her voice cracked as she said the word undead. Mash spoke without thinking. You died. His mind raced with the implications. Red had died in the previous battle, and someone had brought her back to life. That was supposed to be taboo though, and naturally, his gaze fell upon Luke. Even without saying anything, the uncomfortable way that Luke was looking had let Mash understand the situation. Not wanting to push the subject, Mash let his mind wander as he contemplated what that would mean for them. I think leaving the city sounds like a good idea. And something we would have needed to do even without the king's request. Red didn't sound sad, in fact, she seemed eager. However, he did notice her gaze kept glancing down to her chest. Mash didn't know what had happened but wasn't so dense as to not be able to read the signs. Mash decided to move on, and change the subject to something away from Red's condition. Mash let the body of Priscilla uncoil from around his neck and handed it to Luna. Keep her with you. This is one of her bodies and she can tell you if I'm safe or not. Also, she will let me know if you guys are in trouble. She can't talk to you yet, but I might be able to figure something out. Plus, she should be able to do things like write. The communication won't work when I'm in a dungeon, but the safety part should still work. Priscilla sent Mash a simple confirmation and suggested that he might have an affinity for mental magic from the cat thing he fought. She explained more in another message. Mental affinities tend to be weak against most intelligent creatures. However, learning something like mental communication shouldn't be too difficult. It just wasn't a priority. Priscilla's thought process made sense, but he still wanted to learn the skill. Being able to understand beings that he couldn't speak to would do a lot to help him understand what creatures were evil. Plus, it would have let him learn more about the demons. He still remembered how the thing had tried to communicate with him, and he wished he knew what it had said. Luna accepted letting the body of Priscilla run up her arm. She whispered something to it, and Mash watched as it coiled around her arm like a bracelet. Currently, Priscilla's scales were extremely dark shades of blue and green, though the colors were more pronounced when the light hit them. I think this might be better than your previous gift. She still didn't sound happy, but her mood did seem to improve. Mash didn't consider what level Priscilla would be considered to be now but figured that his sister had a very high-level accessory. As Luna stared at the new bracelet, her eyes went a little wide. She stood up abruptly. "I will see you later, I have to get something for you too." Luna rushed out the door, and Mash wondered what she was talking about. Mash was curious, but he was also aware that his brother had remained silent thus far. Mash wanted to know what he was thinking and turned to face him while speaking. "I don't think I will be here till my contract runs out." Arthur rolled his eyes, before giving Mash a response. "Don't bother, I know you didn't plan on staying. However, I would like to hear what your plans are." His gaze swept over everyone, and they spent the next half an hour discussing what they planned on doing. 2 days ago, Mash would have wanted to take a break. To find some time to relax, but now, all he wanted to do was get stronger. Honestly, Mash couldn't stop. Even if becoming high level at such a young age would be annoying, he wanted to be strong enough to protect those around him. That was the only way he could live freely. He advocated for visiting more dungeons, preferably ones with altered time. He wanted to get older quickly, though that would mean that he would miss years of his siblings' life. That thought was depressing, but he knew that the longer he stayed with them, the bigger the risks they faced. The others mostly agreed with the plan, but only after Luke and Jill had handled some details with Arthur. Arthur would inform their families of the situation and help Luke's family get situated in the capital. Apparently, Luke had found the time to purchase a house and his family was on their way to the city. Jill's family didn't plan on moving yet but would consider it now that they were allowed to return. Red didn't say anything, she probably felt like Mash did. Neither of them could really live in cities as they had before. After they had set some of their plans, Mash realized what the implication of the conversation was. Each of them was preparing to be gone for years and taking care of their families if any of them died. The others could return when they wanted, but Mash was not going to come back for years. He needed to be a lot stronger if he wanted to be around his family. Jill would eventually be able to teleport even more freely, and visiting her family would become simple for her, but even that was probably years away. Honestly, of the three of them, her desire to travel with him was the most confusing. While Luke and Red would have some issues living in cities, Jill was beyond any of those restrictions or worries. In fact, with her skills, she would be able to succeed with almost anything she did. Mash didn't bring that up though, as she seemed determined to join them for some reason. With all that out of the way, they could relax a bit, knowing that they had a plan for the future.